Okay, so first of all, would you mind introducing yourself briefly, including your name, your class year, how long you were at Academy, and what you were involved in when you were here?
Okay, I'll try to hit all of those. My name is Allison Beach. I graduated in 2003. I was at Academy from kindergarten through 12th grade, so I was a lifer. While I was there, I did, oh gosh, it's been a while. I wrote for the paper. I played tennis. I did some of the musicals. Those are the things that come to mind.
What is your current title and place of work?
I'm a staff attorney with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, and I'm in the Cleveland Regional Office.
In a couple of sentences, would you mind summarizing what you do?
Sure. So the Office for Civil Rights enforces federal civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination on several bases: race, color, national origin, disability, sex, and age. I think I hit them all. The bulk of our work is disability, and sex and race are pretty common too. So most of what we do is respond to complaints of discrimination, which is what a complainant, usually a student or someone on behalf of a student, files a complaint alleging that some discriminatory act happened. So what we do is evaluate the complaint to see if we have jurisdiction over their allegation. If we do, we investigate it, we gather documentation, talk to witnesses, and then make a determination as to whether there's sufficient evidence of a violation of the law. And then we move to remedy that. So that's the bulk of what we do.
Where does your jurisdiction start and end? I don't know if that's too broad of a question, but.
So in terms of the entities that we cover, it's recipients of federal financial assistance from the Department of Education. So we have both what we call elementary and secondary, and then post-secondary education. We also cover libraries, but it's mostly in education. For elementary and secondary, it's mostly public school districts and charter schools. Schools usually don't fall under our jurisdiction unless somehow they receive federal financial assistance. And then for post-secondary, for colleges, universities, and some trade schools, we have jurisdiction over almost all colleges and universities because they take federal loans. So, and then each law that we enforce has different jurisdictional requirements as far as who can be a complainant, who is prohibited from discrimination under those laws. But generally, students who attend the schools and people who interact with the schools in various ways. But the bulk of our complaints are students or parents of students.
Well, speaking of post-secondary education, where did you go after Academy? And did you feel like Academy did a good job of preparing you for that experience?
Sure. So I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad. And then I went to the George Washington University Law School in DC for law school following that. It was an interesting shift going to this, tiny, I think my graduating class was 80 people, an undergraduate population of like 30,000, I think. So
I'm sure.
It was, just people everywhere, it was a shift. But yeah, I think Academy did a good job of preparing me. I think because there were so many people and just so much, so many choices, it was good. Like, I feel like I had a good foundation of being able to study, for one thing. Like, frankly, I heard some people that the first year, my freshman year, saying that they just never really learned how to study, which I thought was interesting. Like, I think some people just did, they either took easy classes or they didn't, I don't know, they got by without having to develop those skills. So I felt prepared in that way. And also being able to take advanced classes and get AP credits actually helped me. I got to graduate a semester early. I tested out the language requirement, I think, and the math requirement, so I could focus on what I wanted to do. I ended up majoring in English, so I don't think I took any math classes the whole.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, I don't enjoy math that much. I think I did take statistics because I originally was a psych major, but then decided no, I just all humanities. So yeah, that was good. And then moving on to law school, same thing. It was a big law school as far as law schools go. It wasn't as big as the University of Michigan, but there was a big population. So, being able to kind of navigate that and make decisions on what I wanted to do, which classes I wanted to pick, and then be able to have those good study skills and be self-directed. Those were things I think that got a good foundation from being at Academy.
What type of law did you specialize in? I'm not sure if that's how that works, but.
Sure, it can be. I didn't really specialize. I mean, if you want to do like business law or these sort of technical, like they're the kinds of law I don't do. So if you trademark, patent, those kind of things, then you kind of have to take those classes. But I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I took. Once we were out of the first year, it's kind of you have to take certain classes, and then you kind of get to pick. No, I didn't really have a specialty, but I was interested in civil rights law because during undergrad, I did two summers, I think. Yeah, 2 summers of internship with the Ohio Attorney General's office and their civil rights division. Cool. Yeah, and I thought this is really interesting. It was sort of random that I got placed there. Like I wanted to do an internship with the AG's office, and then they placed me there, and I ended up loving it. But in law school, I remember someone told me that, not many people get to do civil rights law, because I think they were defining it narrowly as like, not many people get to argue before the Supreme Court, right? Or
sure.
The EOC or whatever. But so I did take some classes that were focused on that, and then luckily got to follow that up with working in that area.
Was there anything other than those internships that kind of led you to pursue civil rights law as your career, or like what other factors were there?
Sure. So when I actually didn't think I wanted to go to law school or be a lawyer. Parents were both lawyers, and I didn't really know what they did, but it didn't look like that much fun. I didn't want that. And then in college, like I said, I was an English major, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with that. But I took a couple of classes that were, I can't remember what exactly they were called, but there was one that was like, they were cross-listed political science and women's studies. And I think it was like gender in the law and sexuality in the law, like exploring this sort of emerging area of sexual orientation and gender identity in the law. And I loved them. They were fascinating, and they were really hard. They were probably the worst grades I got in all of college, because and I thought, oh no, I do like this. I do want to do something involving the law. And so from there, kind of progressed to where I am now. And I got lucky, frankly. I went to, well, I may be getting ahead of your questions, but
no, you're perfectly fine.
When I graduated from law school, first of all, it was 2010, so the economy was terrible, and I wasn't going to get a job at all, much less one that in an area I wanted to be in. But I went through what's called the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, and it's for people who've just graduated from any grad school, but law school is included, and they just have this giant job fair where you wander around and give your resume to people. And I found there was a Department of Housing and Urban Development has an office called the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. So the guy looked at my resume and said, "Oh, cool, civil rights, you'd fit in great here. Okay, like let's have an interview. You're hired." So I was really lucky that I started there, and then that job was in DC. I wanted to be back in Ohio. Found this job. Here I am.
So did you go straight from that job to the job at the Department of Education?
Yes. Yeah. I was at HUD for about 4 years, I think. Right out of law school, I stayed there for about 4 years. And like I said, I didn't want to be in DC anymore. I wanted to come back to Ohio, and saw this job listing, and they said, "Yeah, you've been doing similar work there, so come on over here."
That's really cool. So is it fair to say that you didn't really see yourself doing this type of work when you're in high school, but you knew you wanted to come back to Ohio? Is that where you were at? Or
when I was in high school, I'm not sure if I knew what I wanted to do.
That's fair.
Yeah, I know I've talked to my mother about this. Like she switched careers in the middle of her, I think she went to law school when she was like 40. So she's
really cool.
To me, it's unfortunate that we make people feel like they have to choose what they want to do with the rest of their lives when they're 18, 19, 20 years old,
Mm-hmm.
You might know, and that's great. And you might try something and not like it and try something else. Luckily, I fell into something that I like. But yeah, in high school, I really didn't know. Luckily, it worked out well, I guess.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that you didn't quite know, because I think a lot of us are feeling that right now as we go off.
Oh, yeah. No, I would say, look, go in the direction that you're interested in. And, I don't know. I know a lot of people who, when I went to law school, I went straight from undergrad to law school, and there were a few people in my class that were that way, but more people had either taken a few years between, or there were I knew who had, they'd been 10 years out of school, had started a career and decided, I don't want to do this. I'm going to law school.
Sure.
And like I said, my mom, she got a PhD in English. She taught English, and then at 40 decided to go to law school. So yeah, if you don't know when you're a senior in high school, that's fine in my experience.
That is good to hear, to say simply. So you mentioned that study skills from school are kind of what helped you in like your college and law school days. What other skills did you learn from academy that kind of still influence your life, or were just something weird that you still remember learning that was helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that helped, especially in law school, was, I don't know what to call it, I guess like critical reading skills and being able to, I took English classes where, again, having a small class size and being able to take, especially like the advanced classes in high school, I think that's one of the skills that really helps you succeed in law school, especially because it's, reading a novel or whatever, a story, whatever it is, really carefully and closely, and then being able to discuss it lends itself to being able to read statutes and cases and those kind of things. Like they're really pretty similar when you get into the classroom. So those classes, I think, helped me a lot, and that led to me wanting to study English in undergrad, and then to moving on to law school.
Just a slightly off-topic question, but how bad is cold calling in law school? Is it as scary as it seems in like TV shows?
Oh, it depends. So the first year, I think at most law schools, it's like this. There's a few classes that you have to, I think your whole curriculum is dictated your first year, like you don't get to pick. So I had, I think, let's say there's, 4 classes. There were 4 very different styles for my first year.
Sure.
Of professors. So one of them was like super nice. He would cold call, but like he wasn't scary about it. Then I had one professor who I think he just really thrived on it. He loved cold calling, and I think he loved terrifying us. So I was always super prepared for him. And then there was one guy who the first day he came in, and we were all terrified. It was torts. And he walked up to the board, and he starts talking about a case. And, we're all saying, we didn't get a reading assignment. We didn't know what we were flipping through our books. Like, oh my God, what is he talking about? And he calls on someone to talk about this case. And the person starts talking, and he says, in my class, we stand up when we talk about cases. So the person stands up, and we're all like, oh my God. And the person starts reciting this case, and we're all freaking out. And eventually he gets up and writes on the board, just kidding, smiley face. And it turns out the person was a second-year law student at 2L who had volunteered to terrify us. And then he continued, said, relax, there's no reading assignment, I don't think he cold called. I think he assigned, like, you knew you were on you're on deck to be called. Kind of.
Oh, got it.
But there's some professors who I think enjoy terrifying.
Even if I were to be considering law school, the cold calling is just a very big reason not to go.
It does look bad in movies, but it like I said, it varies widely. Honestly, I remember my first year we watched, there was a group of people who were we had like a small writing class, and we got together and watched some law school movies. So there's The Paper Chase, which is a famous one. I think that's the one where he says, look to your left, look to your right, 2 of you won't graduate, or something like that.
Yeah.
And we watched Legally Blonde. And honestly, Legally Blonde is a pretty accurate movie. Classroom scenes, the courtroom scenes, no, but the classroom scenes, they got it. It was pretty good.
Okay, I might have to watch Legally Blonde for some research. Moving on from law school, in terms of your job, what surprised you the most about what you do, and what do you think would surprise other people?
I don't know if it's the thing that would surprise them most, but something that does surprise people is just that this is something that exists. This is a career for lawyers, right? I think a lot of people think of lawyers as litigators, right? People who are up in court, defending clients, arguing cases, that kind of thing. Or maybe they're sort of corporate lawyers, like in suits, in fancy law firms, writing stuff on behalf of their clients. So I think just the fact that there's a lot of opportunities for lawyers in government and, in nonprofits, and that aren't sort of the traditional lawyer role that you would think of. I don't argue cases in court. We're an administrative agency. So I sort of get to be the judge in a way. We make an administrative determination. So yeah, that's something that's interesting. And also I think just that I think people are surprised at sort of the amount of discrimination that goes on, for lack of a better word, in the disability context, there's a lot of very technical procedural requirements. So it's not as much like discrimination, like people treating someone differently or badly because they're disabled. It's more they're not following the procedural requirements. But we get, race discrimination, harassment cases that are sometimes pretty egregious. And I think that surprised me a bit. And I think it surprises people that I talk to who aren't in this line of work.
Discrimination seems like such a lofty term that you don't realize all the ways it manifests.
And discrimination from our complainants, we get a lot of, so most complainants that we get aren't lawyers, right? And they don't know the legal definitions of terms. So we get a lot of complaints that say I was discriminated against. And what they mean is something bad happened to me or something unfair happened to me. And it's not necessarily discrimination in the legal sense,
Sure.
Well, a teacher was mean to me or to my kid, and, they're XYZ race or they have this disability. So fix it. But that's not what it is. One has to be because of the other. Yeah. So discrimination can be kind of a big, scary term, but it does encompass a lot. Although sometimes the complaints we dismiss, a lot of times they're not, they're not what we have jurisdiction over.
Got it. So what we've covered what surprises you, but what do you love the most about what you do?
I really like being able to, not all the time, but most of the time, talk to complainants, talk to people who, hear people's stories, right? I think it's really interesting to be able, even if I end up not being able to do anything about it, I think just, being able to listen to someone's story, if we open an investigation, it's like a puzzle, right? We say, okay, we have this side, and then now we're going to get the side of the school. And then we have to figure out based on that, what do we think really happened? Or what do we think, what fits within our jurisdiction that we can remedy? So I enjoy that. It's a challenge. It's not always it's almost never straightforward. We get these complaints and we think, oh, okay, that's, we do this kind of complaint all the time. That'll be a quick investigation, quick agreement. And it never is. There's always something throws a wrench in it, that makes it more complicated. And like I said, if we can't do anything about it, sometimes people get mad, but sometimes they say, thank you for listening. Sometimes we're the only people who've picked up the phone because we're a free, we're the federal government. So we handle these complaints for free. It's not court. Just having someone listen and acknowledge their experience can help sometimes, even if we can't move forward and get them relief.
I'm sure being heard, just the act of it, is probably incredibly impactful. What's the biggest challenge that you've faced in your current role? And has COVID changed that at all? I'm sure with like remote learning and how schools are operating very differently, you guys have had to adjust as well.
In terms of the actual way our work is done, it hasn't changed too much because the regional offices kind of split up the country into regions. The Cleveland office covers all of Ohio and Michigan. We're actually a pretty small region geographically, but there's just so many schools in Ohio and Michigan that we keep up. So even before COVID, we didn't do a lot of things face-to-face. We didn't go to schools a whole lot unless they were local or unless there was some reason that we had to. Like if it was a physical accessibility case, meaning, somebody who uses a wheelchair can't get up this ramp, or, it's usually more complicated than that. But most of the time we would do our interviews on the phone. We would, get documents by mail or by email. So that hasn't changed too much. But yeah, it's last spring and then into, now there's sort of more established remote learning or combinations of remote and in-person learning. It's a new wrench that's thrown in these, or a new hurdle in these cases, right? So a lot of our cases have to do with children with disabilities in public schools can get an IEP, an individualized education program, which is an IEP, or what's called a Section 504 plan. Essentially, they're plans that say this child has this disability or disabilities, and these are the things that the school is agreeing to do to give them an equal opportunity, to learn. So normally we get a lot of those complaints. Usually, we investigate. A lot of times they didn't implement the plan for whatever reason, and then we say, okay, do it moving forward, and determine if there's any compensatory education they need for the services they missed. When you're remote, especially when you're suddenly remote, that gets complicated. You can't provide an in-person occupational therapy or physical therapy if you're not there, right? And you're not going to send people into people's homes during a pandemic. So yeah, that has complicated things. And a lot of the cases that we handle, a lot of the complaints we handle, a big factor is that the student or the student's parents and the district or the university or whatever it may be, a lot of times the relationship goes badly sort of over a period of time, and then communication breaks down. And so when you're remote and there's, extra communication hurdles, that makes it even harder. Like one side, something happens and one side starts to distrust the other side. And then, then you're at home and they're in their office and it gets worse. So yeah, all those things have definitely impacted my work in the last year.
That sounds incredibly complicated. Has that been the most challenging thing you faced, like doing this work, or what other challenges have you faced with this line of work?
Well, one of the challenges is being in the federal government, as opposed to in being a lawyer in a law firm or somewhere with more resources, frankly, is that we don't. So to back up, a lot of the people in my office, a lot of the lawyers in my office, we're not all lawyers, came to the office from a law firm setting. And so they're used to being paid more, frankly, having to work more and just having a different atmosphere. Like they, because they get paid more, they also get more, like a law firm will have, what am I trying to say? Like better amenities, better technology, more support staff, things like that. So sometimes just what we want to do is hindered by our resources. I mean, we may be understaffed. Our technology might not be working because we don't always have the most state-of-the-art technology. I don't want to sound like it's terrible.
No, I understand.
It's a little different than maybe a big law firm that has all the resources in the world. As far as the actual work goes, I think one thing that's really challenging is when there's a situation where something bad has happened, something unfair has happened to a student, and we either can't jurisdictionally address it because it doesn't fall under the laws we enforce, or for whatever reason we can't fix it. That's hard. It's hard to have to tell a complainant that, and it's hard just personally, because you get a little invested in the cases to have to not be able to fix it, to address it. And we're not a court. We don't award millions of dollars in punitive damages or damages for emotional distress, things like that. Even sometimes, we feel like they're warranted, but we can't. So that's frustrating sometimes.
How do you enforce whatever decision that you do make if there isn't something behind your decision?
You mean like how do we, like if they won't do what we ask them to do, what do we do? How do we get them?
Yeah, basically.
That's a good question. So the laws that we enforce, they say that if a school doesn't, so the laws vary, but basically we have the power to take away the federal funding that jurisdiction. We don't get there very much, if ever. I think what usually keeps the resolution moving is that the school or the district, we're the federal government, like we have some weight behind what we say, and they want to do what's right. I mean, most districts do, even if, they push back, they don't want to spend money. They don't want to admit that there's been some failure a lot of the times. But at the end of the day, I mean, also what we ask for is usually pretty reasonable. Like I said, we can't make them pay millions of dollars in damages. We can't, most of our remedies are pretty reasonable, I think. Some of them require a lot of work, but they don't usually require a lot of money or a huge shift in their practices. So I think a combination of those things, districts ultimately do want to do what's right, especially moving forward, so they don't get us on their back again. And I mean, maybe to avoid the
publicity of having a federal investigation against them. You know, it sounds kind of scary. It's really not. I reassure people, you know, we're the feds coming in, you know, it sounds bad, but we really just want to ensure compliance. Yeah, that's interesting because I wasn't sure if you revoked funding often or if that was a very rare case.
I have never, I mean, I've been there, 6 years now? No, my office has never gotten to the point where we're actually revoking it. We've gotten to the point where we start. So if it's not, we say we found a violation, we have like basically a draft resolution agreement for the school to sign. So that's what we do. If we find a violation, we give them a draft resolution agreement saying, agree to do these things. We'll monitor your implementation of this agreement. And then we'll say, once you've done those things, we'll say, good, you're in compliance. If they don't, and we can negotiate that a bit. If we get to an impasse, then there's a process to move forward. It goes before an ALJ, an administrative law judge, and it can go, it can go further. It can go to the step of revoking funding, but I've never seen it get there. And my understanding is it rarely does.
Right, that's interesting. Okay, taking a step back, if a student was interested in going into civil rights law more generally, not necessarily for the Department of Education, what would you recommend, like steps that they would take or advice that you would have for them?
Be broad in your search, in your definition of what civil rights work is, because like I said, I was discouraged when I was in law school by somebody telling me like, oh, well, yeah, this is real interesting, but nobody gets to do this kind of work, because they were being narrow in what they were considering. So I think there's at most of the big government agencies, at HUD, at HHS, at Education, in the Department of Justice, there are civil rights offices that enforce these various anti-discrimination laws administratively. So that I wasn't really aware of that whole world. I just thought of DOJ and EEOC, right? So employment law and Department of Justice. And there's state, again, I interned for the state attorney general's office. They have a civil rights division. So state and local agencies have those. And there's even some, like I know in the housing context, there's some local fair housing enforcement agencies. So they're all over the place. I mean, there's a whole world of ways that you could be doing civil rights enforcement work in different ways. And there's also on the other side, there's firms that do this. More often the firms are there's a lot of firms that specialize in defending school districts and universities in these kind of cases. That's still civil rights work, but what involved in what the government agencies are usually involved in is more, we're a neutral decision maker. But if you're interested in the defense side, there's ample opportunities for that. So I think that's the biggest thing. Just don't, be broad, be kind of creative in what you're defining as civil rights work.
That's an interesting point. When you were at HUD, was a lot of the discrimination work that you were doing still with disability, or was that more broad?
Yeah, disability is the big category, I think, in most agencies, because the requirements are sort of more technical. So there's more ways to mess it up, frankly. In housing, it was more, again, accessibility is a big one, especially in an apartment complex or a multifamily housing development. And in housing, actually, they have an interesting protected class, which is familial status. So you can't discriminate against somebody because they have kids, essentially. The jurisdiction is, it's not everywhere, but you generally can't discriminate against someone because they have kids. And that area is interesting just because a lot of landlords don't know that. And so they'll just blatantly say no kids. And so there you go. That's a violation. And they'll try to say, oh, it's because of safety. We don't put kids on the second floor because there's a balcony they could fall off or something. And that's not a defense, right? You just need to make your place safe, right? Or kids are too loud or whatever. So that was an interesting area. We don't have that protected class in education, but we also don't have religion, which is interesting. Religion was an interesting area for housing. People's religious practices would sometimes clash with the landlords or housing providers in different ways.
That's interesting that it's not a protected class in education. I guess if I didn't know, I would have assumed that it was.
Yeah, in education you can't. Oh, meaning religion in education? Yeah, I don't know why. I assume that it's partly because there are a lot of religious institutions providing or religious affiliated schools. Like there's Catholic schools, there's just, various iterations of that. So I assume that's part of why. I don't really know why. I don't know why. I could speculate, but it is interesting coming from that being a fairly good chunk of what I was doing at HUD to just none of that in education.
So you mentioned that a lot of the lawyers at the department came from private firms, how would you recommend students decide between working for the federal government or a nonprofit, or working for like a firm, like a bigger law firm?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think the people that I know, part of it is just, what subject you enjoy and whether you want to do litigation or not. For me, I know, frankly, a lot of people just ended up at law firms, at least for the beginning of their career, because they needed the money. Law school is expensive. And being an associate, even, a first year, or even in the first few years of your law firm career, you can make a lot of money. I think, if that's the case, then I know a lot of people who kind of started out there and then decided it wasn't for them and transferred to somewhere where maybe they were making less money, but the demands were less and the work was interesting or more in line with what they wanted to do. So I don't know. I think it really depends on what subject matter you want to do. Some people really thrive in the law firm setting. They don't mind billing hours. They don't mind, the various, sort of the hierarchy and all that. But we have hierarchy in the federal government too, but it's a little different. So I don't know. I think it's hard to point to a set of rules. It's very individual, but I think, again, you don't have to worry about your first choice being your forever choice, just like with picking a career, right? If you start at a law firm and you hate it, then there'll be opportunities in different areas. Just like if you start in the government, I think I've known a few people who've gone the other way, although more often it's to sort of a smaller firm, boutique firm, something a place that does specific. A lot of the people that I've known that have gone from the government to a law firm often go to defense of districts and universities, because they kind of know it. And some people go from the government to, in ed, a lot of people go from the government to a university, actually, to work in either their Title IX department or legal department. So again, your first choice is not your last choice. There's all kinds of, especially the more experience you have, the more it opens up.
That seems to be your running piece of advice. And also, don't define civil rights too narrowly. But what's the best piece of advice that you received? Obviously not the piece about civil rights law, but
best, you mean like professionally? The best,
or personally, either one.
Again, I go back to, I don't know if it was advice exactly, but I go back to my mom's reassurance, right? That you don't have to pick right away. Whatever you pick isn't forever.
I guess I'll rephrase. If
Sure.
there was something you had to tell your younger self, even like out of law school or like your high school self, about like going into this field, what would it be?
Well, I think one thing, and then this doesn't even just apply to law, that I just thought of was, as I've been a lawyer for 10 years now, and just a professional for 10 years now. I think I always kind of worried, like I felt like other people were, I don't know, smarter or doing a better job, or I guess it's sort of that imposter syndrome kind of thing. And the longer that I do it, the more confident I am, the more I realize seeing other lawyers work, like there's some great lawyers, there's some not so great lawyers, there's some great government employees, there's some not so great government employees. Be confident in your work and know that when you're starting out, you're not going to know everything, and don't be afraid to ask other people, because that I was nervous about. I think when I started my career, I was nervous about coming to somebody and saying, I don't know, I don't understand this, or, I don't know what I'm doing. Help, please give me some advice. And I found that people generally don't judge you. People like to help you, and they usually like to talk about themselves, which is what I'm doing right now, I guess. Say, hey, have you, I've never dealt with this before. Have you dealt with this? Most people are more than willing to be like, oh yeah, I had a case like that 5 years ago. Let me pull up all the documents for you. Let me walk you through this, because they've been there before. That's especially in this job, because we've had a lot of hiring over the time I've been there. I was nervous about approaching people and taking up their time and, looking like I didn't know what I was doing. But now I've been in the position where the new people have asked me questions, and I'm like, oh yeah, great. I want to do this now because I've been in your position, and now I want to be the one helping you out. Yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind. Wherever you are, whether you're a lawyer or whatever you're doing, is don't be afraid of looking stupid or, looking like you don't know what you're doing. It's expected that you're not going to know what you're doing right away. And it shows that you're smart to go to the people who do know what they're doing and ask for their advice, ask for their help.
Going off of the good and not so good government employees comment, are there any personal attributes or personality types that you think do well in this career versus don't do well?
For my office, I think, again, not all of us are lawyers, but I think a lot of the people in my office, so there's some investigators who are not attorneys, but the people in my office, you need to be good with, I don't know if uncertainty is the right word, but you need to handle situations where there's not a clear right answer. And I think a lot of people in my office, most people in my office really enjoy that. Like I said, kind of trying to figure out this puzzle or figure out the best answer. There might not be, one clear answer. You need to have patience for debating issues and, working through, because we work in teams. We're not, I have to, there's levels of review in the government. I usually am not the one investigating the case, making the decision, doing the whole process by myself. And so when there's these review layers, you get into debates, you get into conversations, you have to be comfortable with that. And so that, I think that's an attribute of a lot of people who gravitate towards law, but in both my government jobs, that's been important too.
The level of bureaucracy and the complicatedness of that in government is certainly something to deal with. Was the internship that you had with the state attorney general what really prepared you to go into this type of work, or were there any other experiences that really drove you towards it or even prepared you for it?
Yeah, I think that the internship helped in a lot of ways because it was state government, so getting comfortable with bureaucracy, and it was state law, so we were enforcing different laws than what I do now, but they're similar. The protected classes overlapped, kind of the ideas that the way that you would analyze a claim were similar. So yeah, that did help prepare me a lot. A lot of the classes that I took in law school helped, especially after that first year of, very defined classes I took. I can't even remember the ones I took, but I took a lot that were, I don't know. Yeah, I guess the internship, yes. And I did a volunteer internship with DOJ, which was interesting. So having that little peek into the federal government, it wasn't in civil rights. It was in a totally different area, but having those, combining those experiences, you kind of get comfortable with the way that kind of work goes.
This may not apply specifically to your job within the department, but how often does the jurisdiction of the federal government conflict with the state government, especially in education, because that's such a convoluted area?
Frankly, we don't worry too much about it because federal law trumps. So
yeah.
But we do. I mean, it's interesting, especially having cases from Ohio and Michigan, because they do have slightly different education systems, frankly, just the way that things are set up. And they have some laws that are a little bit different from each other and from federal law. So sometimes we'll get people bringing up state law issues and we just have to say, no, sorry, that's not us. We don't do that. And people get confused because a lot of times people, they'll file with the Department of Education and they won't realize that we're the federal Department of Education.
Sure.
Bringing up stuff like state level stuff. We don't know. I don't know what that is. I usually know what it is, but I can't do anything about it, So yeah, we got a little bit of that at HUD too, but mostly we just enforce federal law. We don't worry about state law.
I'm sure that's better being on the federal end than the state end of that then.
Yeah, I think they probably are like, oh, that's fun.
I'm sure this doesn't affect you as much because you're doing legal work, but how does the way the department functions or even the outlook of the department change with different heads and different administrations and the changing political climate?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that I'm dealing with that right now. I've been through two administration changes now. So when I started at HUD, it was under the Obama administration. And then, the shift from Obama to Trump was while I was at Ed, and now we're dealing with another one. So the way the federal government set up, it's mostly career civil servants.
Mm-hmm.
who've been there for a long time who aren't, they don't change with the administrations. And then, but every time a new administration comes in, there's this whole layer of political appointees that comes in. And so when I was at HUD, I was actually in headquarters, like in the DC office.
DC, sure.
HUD has regional offices as well, or field offices, they call them. So it has been interesting to see the difference between being in a headquarters office and being in a field office. But one of those differences is, especially in a field office or in a regional office, it doesn't affect our work day to day that much. And it really depends on the law. So like at HUD, I think HUD is a little bit less high profile in a lot of ways. Like Ed has gotten into the national discourse a lot because of Title IX enforcement, sexual harassment on college campuses. And the last secretary there was sort of more attention on the way we were doing our work than I was used to at HUD. But it depends, I guess. So if a secretary or even a president decides to make something an area that they're targeting, that they're really interested in, then there'll be more attention on that, and there might be more guidance. So there's the laws, there's the statutes, the regulations, and then administrative agencies can issue guidance that kind of explains how we enforce the laws that we enforce. And they're not legally binding, right? They're just sort of more, this is how we're doing it right now. So that's really where the difference can come. Different administrations will put out guidance, and then a new administration will come in and rescind that guidance and put out a new guidance. And then sometimes there'll be gaps where we're not really sure what we're doing. But, we still have statutory language. We still have the regulation there. So it's not like we're completely, things are completely changing. It's just sort of how we interpret the language. So, and there's also just the what's the word? Practical issue of a new administration comes in, there's a hiring freeze. There's maybe we have to kind of pause on some things while the new administration decides how they want to, handle certain matters. So that's where we are now because a new administration just came in. But broadly, there's people who've been in my office for 20 years, and you just, it ebbs and flows.
Yeah, you forget how much of the government is just civil servants. They aren't the people on the news. There's
a lot of us. Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, so unless there's anything else you'd like to add, I think those are all my questions.
I don't think so.
Well, I really appreciate that you took the time to speak to me today. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.